what tends to be the deciding factor, whether it's math, whether it's user needs, when companies choose a private cloud solution? In your experience, what tends to be the one thing that really pushes them over the edge? Is it cost? Is it what the users need? Hopefully.
I think
what is the deciding factor?
I think the thing is that there's no one thing. I think it depends a lot on the business goals, the goals of the team that's pushing the project forward, and the business goals can vary pretty dramatically. Many companies will pursue cloud, public or private, on an economic basis. Particularly on the private cloud side, we often see companies going that route to reap incremental enhancements on their existing investments in virtualization, automate a little bit more, etc. There are other companies that take perhaps a more visionary tack and really see cloud as an opportunity to transform not just IT, but to transform the business. And the approach that one takes, the economic models that back those approaches, the technology choices that undergird those approaches are dramatically different depending on what the business needs and what the business is trying to do.
Yeah, so if I can just build on that, I would say...
Just a real quick one, Joe. Is there a way to create this hypothetical company? Say it's a Midwestern hospital chain with seven different hospitals, kind of a mid-level business. Is there a way to answer the question for a specific type of business, or is it still, very situational?
It's situational in that you've got different risk tolerances, you've got different stances towards innovation. There are a lot of factors that go on it. What do you think, Joe?
No, I completely agree with you, Sam, and I was just going to boil it down to it's either strategic or economic, right? And so I think a good example of strategic is Netflix, that's basically said, look, we don't want to waste our time with data centers. We're not going to, nickel and dime which way is the better way. We want to get out of that business so that we can focus on what's really important to us around, content and, customer experience and things like that. At the other extreme, you've got the, classic pure financial. And James, to your question, I don't think it's vertically dependent. Sam's got it, hit the nail right on the head, which is it's based on things like, culture and tolerance to risk. So most large companies that I know will always want a business case for why to do A or B, right? And they've got very disciplined processes against project approvals and, board approval and things like that. And they can't just say, we think this is good, or, we just don't want to be involved in worrying about our own data centers. We're not in that business. And so for those, then they can kind of have their cake and eat it too, which is they will address that risk of not doing anything in the cloud by saying, oh yeah, we're running a bunch of trials and we've got some prototypes and we're letting some people experiment with this stuff. Mm-hmm. When it actually comes time to committing corporate resources to a plan of action, which could be career ending, then they're going to want a very solid financial assessment and a business case, with a sensitivity analysis and with a risk assessment and risk mitigation plan, because that's the way they do everything.
Well, there's always yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
There's always a mixture, as Sam said. There's always a mixture of the cultural and the economic. Because, for example, in some cases, cloud is seen by the CIO or by IT as a kind of stepping stone. Private cloud is seen as a stepping stone to the public cloud. And so, for example, if the CIO is very concerned about the security of data, and we need to talk about that point because that's an interesting question, who is more secure, public or private cloud? But be that as it may, it feels good to be able to say the data is within our virtual four walls, right? The data is on our premise, even though literally it's not on our premise. It may actually be stored inside our partner's premise. It feels good to claim that ERP data or transactional data is inside our private cloud. And yet at the same time, the CIO, as Joe said, needs to be thinking about public cloud because that's what the CEO is thinking about. That's what all the users are asking for. So private cloud is a step in that direction, but those viewpoints will again be tempered by the economic arguments. And you can do the kind of analysis that Joe just took us through, where there are break-even points based on different types of scenarios and workloads and so forth, where a private cloud is more or less economical than corresponding public cloud. So you have both sides of it, the cultural and the economic.
What was your point about data security? If you're talking about, was there a point they're making about the safety of data, or is that?
Yeah, the security. Who's more secure, your private cloud or a large public cloud provider?
That really does this all the time and is totally protected as much as you can be, rather than just one individual data center. Sam, what were you going to say?
I mean, I think what Michael's pointing out is a lot of people are like, oh, the public cloud isn't secure, but when you actually dig in, the question you have to ask is, are the two folks that you hired, just out of trade school, who are your security staff, as good as, the 500 people that each of the major cloud providers has with, PhDs in obscure, security topics and 24/7 global security operations staff and, contacts in the research community to deal with zero-day vulnerabilities, et cetera. And that's, not including other things like as far as mitigating distributed denial of service attacks, the point that an enterprise data center has nowhere near the bandwidth, and therefore things like network firewalls or network-based anti-DDoS capabilities that, again, a large provider would have. So, I think there's trade-offs both ways, right? Like, you can look at, it varies based on vulnerability. So if you say, vulnerability by vulnerability, sometimes the public cloud provider is going to win, like the ability to maintain a leading-edge security staff and anti-DDoS capability. And other times, for example, risk that your data will be subpoenaed under some sort of, completely sealed letter that the provider isn't even allowed to say anything about, then that's obviously a bigger risk than a subpoena that would be required to grab data that's physically on your facility. So there's trade-offs both ways, and it's simplistic to just say one is better than the other.
Can I just make a point about cloud in general? What does cloud mean? Cloud actually means pooling of resources, right? That's the foundation of cloud, public cloud or private cloud. And when it comes to skills such as, and expertise such as security, the larger pool is going to win. And I think that's an important way to think about it.
The larger pool of experts, you're saying.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah. Right.
So Michael made an interesting point earlier that I wanted to tag on to. You mentioned the notion of private cloud being a stepping stone to public cloud, and we've talked about that. That was a very popular notion a few years ago. What I've seen more recently is that folks have realized that private cloud is actually pretty hard, and public cloud is a stepping stone. Public cloud in many ways has become a stepping stone to private cloud. So you're seeing enterprises take advantage of the ease of use and ease of access of public cloud resources for tests, development, and other purposes, but the target for deployment and their long-term intention is to establish a private cloud that gives them many of those economic and agility advantages, but without the risks, perceived or not, of the public cloud.
Hey, James, can I take 60 seconds and show 2 more slides?
You've got audio-visual help?
All right, let's see.
Let's see it.
Are you still live on the slides?
I think you've got to click screen share again.
Okay, I do. All right, let's see.
Even for bringing the audio-visual help, I'm going to give you some applause.
All right.
That needs to be praised, Joe.
Okay. So briefly, I'll just to build on what Sam just said, and also get into, well, what do we mean by hybrids? I mean, this is kind of generally what people mean somehow with hybrids, right? There's some users, there's an enterprise data center or global network of them, and there's a cloud provider or maybe several and their individual locations. But I've identified 8 major types of hybrids, and that's before we get into combinations of these. One of which is the notion that I can kind of run simultaneously in both enterprise and cloud. And because it's essentially stateless for whatever service I'm offering, I don't need to worry about any data sharing between them. Then there's the BCDR scenario where the users actually connect to the enterprise data center, but there's synchronous mirroring, let's say, and/or object replicas that are stored, of databases or what have you, and recovery ultimately in the cloud. Then there's the cloud as the front end, where I'm doing my content delivery or delivering applications out of the cloud, but my transactions ultimately are going into some sort of database of record in my own data center. And then there's sort of the ideal that we'd like to see, and which will happen sooner or later, around full bidirectional data integration. So whichever way users come in, I still have kind of a replica of whatever transactions have occurred in both locations. And then what triggered it is Sam's comment, which is there's also thinking about hybrids essentially over time, which is a different kind of way, maybe not a traditional use of hybrid, but running, dev test, let's say, on my own laptop and/or data center, and then pushing it into the cloud for actual production. Then there's running dev test in the cloud, including maybe load testing, but then running production in my data center. And then there are these 2 migrations. So there's the one on the left, bottom left, which Michael mentioned, which is kind of starting in the private cloud and then migrating over time to the public. And that looks maybe more like a Netflix strategy. And then there's the migration from the cloud, which is, once I've proven everything and, maybe there's a business case to be made, like the classic one is Zynga with zCloud a few years ago, and more recently Evernote found 4-to-1 savings by moving out of the public cloud into their own data center. So that's kind of the case that Sam was talking about. Okay, that's my 90 seconds, so let me go back to,
all right.
To you
and
guys.
Then let's not forget there are quite a number of software vendors these days who will allow you to move your instance of software from public to private as well, which make this transition that Joe was just describing easier.
Yeah, and that was kind of my part of my opening comment, is kind of around the notion of when you're selecting a private cloud, one of the things that you'd want to think about is exactly that. Like, it may be the best private cloud ever, but if you ever think that you want to get out of Dodge and go public, then you don't want to have to say, oops, now we've got to completely rethink our stack and rewrite all our applications.
Moral of the story is that there's a dizzying array of cloud deployments, cloud configurations.
Right.
And I think it's like one of those almost unwritten aspects of the cloud is that there's all those rogue deployments where people just got frustrated with IT and they use their division's credit card and they have their own little cloud deployment. There could be several of them in the company that the company might not even be aware of the other deployments going on.